Okay, so now that you know a little bit about parameterized functions, we're going to talk about functions that not only accept values in their parameters, but also return values. Okay, for example, let's say I gave you an assignment like this. Okay, it says write a function that will accept an item's cost and tax rate as arguments. Okay, so we have two parameters in that function. That you could do. However, there's a catch here. The function will compute the tax, that you can do, and then return the tax amount back to main. Okay, so we can code functions that not only accept things and do whatever they're supposed to do with those things, but also give us something back. And that's something that we did not do in the previous videos. So that's what we're going to do here. Okay, so here I have a clean program. I'm going to start with the declaration as usual. Now, before I just said, okay, just type void and then move on to the function name, but that's no longer the case. This function is going to compute the tax and return the tax amount back to main. So because this function is giving us something back, we have to specify the type, the data type of the thing that we're getting back. In this case, it's a money amount, so we're going to indicate that we will be getting a float back. You see the difference? Before it was always void because those functions, all those print char functions that we did before, they didn't give us anything back. They printed the character and that was the end of it. Now this is different. So we're going to type float. And then let's choose a name for the function. How about calc tax or something like that? And then we said that this function will accept the item's cost and the tax rate. So let's add the parameters for that. So that would be a float and a float, right? You could do double or double and double as well, but float is good enough here. Okay, so that is our function declaration. Let's go copy that, paste it in the bottom. Okay, we're careful to get rid of that semicolon. Okay, so we said this function will accept the cost and the tax rate. Let's say tax rate. All right, throw down a set of curly braces. Okay, so this function is going to compute the tax and then return it back to main. So let's write the code to do that. We can create a variable called, maybe tax amount. Okay, and then tax amount is, of course, equal to the cost times the tax rate. Okay, so now we've got the tax amount. So those are our parameter values that we're using to compute the tax amount, which we're putting into a brand new variable. And then we're going to, because this program returns the tax amount back to main, we have to end with a return statement. Okay? And that'll do it. Now, one thing you can do, and you'll see this in your book, if you don't want to create an extra variable here, you could kill two birds with one stone. And simply do this. Okay, that can also be your function there. That'll work as well. Okay, so let's call this function. Why don't we begin? We'll say float item cost, and then tax rate. We'll set those to 0. We'll have the user enter the values. So we'll say enter item cost. And then we'll have the user enter the tax rate. Okay. Just to, well, here, let's go ahead and call the function. Now, the thing is, we're getting a value back. We're getting a value back from this function. When you get a value back from a function, you've got to put it somewhere. When we were doing print char, this was the way we called the function. And then whatever here we were passing as arguments. Print char was just the function call sitting by itself on the line. Okay, that was the whole line of code. When you're getting something back from a function, this won't cut it. Okay, because if we're getting something back, we've got to put that value somewhere. We've got to put it somewhere. So if I did something like this, calc tax, and then I pass the item cost and the tax rate, okay, this will run. This will work just fine. We won't get any errors, but I'm going to get some tax out of this. I'm going to get a dollar amount out of this, and I'm not putting it anywhere. It's just kind of, slips into oblivion, and it's lost. So there's no point. You have to put that return value somewhere. Either send it to the output screen or put it in a variable, which is what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to go up to the top here, and we'll say maybe tax amount. Okay, and now here's what you do. Tax amount equals. Okay, so you see, whenever you have a function that returns a value, the function call is going to be part of a larger statement, often a variable assignment, or you could have done something like this as well. And then the tax amount would be sent to the screen. It's probably better to capture it in a variable, but you see what I mean? It's not like print char. Print char, we didn't get anything back, so there was really no need for this. But when you're getting something back, you've got to put it somewhere. Okay, so let's run this. Oh, well, we have to display the answer to the user. How about we'll say, how about why don't we calculate a grand total? So we'll say total equals the item cost plus the tax amount. Okay. You could also, if you didn't want to create that tax amount variable here, you could have done this as well. Because this will give us the tax amount, basically. So the item cost, let's say I have a $10 item and a 10% tax rate. This will be $10 plus the $1 that we get back from this function. So when you have a function that returns a value, you can imagine that return value, as a substitute for the function call itself. So this highlighted here will give me back $1. So that's $10 plus $1. I'd get $11 for the total. Okay. So we'll go back to this way. All right, so we'll say your total is okay, let's do it. All right, so let's do that $10 item. The tax rate will be 10%, and there's my $11. Okay, just to prove a point here, I will put the function call right into the math statement, like I showed you before, and it'll work all the same. Okay, $10, and we'll say 10% tax again, and there's my $11. Okay, so you know what, real quickly I want to address a couple of things. First of all, you may notice the way I name my variables. Here we have cost and tax rate. Up here I made it a point to say item cost and tax rate, with underscores. It's a little different. Could I have used just simply cost and tax rate here? Absolutely. Absolutely. The thing is, though, I wanted to prove a point that it's not the same. I can use cost and tax rate, but these are not the same cost and tax rate as we have down here in the function. Parameters, remember what parameters are? They're special variables that belong to the function. Okay, so the function has its own little variables that it uses to accept values and then, use those values to do its job. In this case, calculate the tax. So main has its own set of variables for the cost and the tax rate, and the function has a separate set of variables for the cost and the tax rate. So I typically, in your book will do this as well, use different names for the mains versions of the variables and the parameters, just to underscore the fact that these are different places in memory. You can use the same names if you like, but I just want you to realize that there's a distinction there. So main has its own copies of the variables that it uses to put the user's input in there, and then the function has its own copies in the form of parameters. And while we're talking about this, let's step through here. I'm going to toggle a breakpoint and then run this. Uh-oh. What do we have here? Oh, because I was fiddling around with the variable names. Okay, that should do it. Okay, so I'm entering the cost and then the tax rate. Okay, so now I'm at the breakpoint and I'm in debug mode here. If I press F11, watch what, okay, here, look. We've got $10. If I hover over the cost, I've got $10 in the cost. The tax rate is 0.1 or 10%. Okay, so I'm going to press F11. Here I am at the front door of CalcTax. Look who's coming through the door. We have the $10 for the cost going into that parameter, 0.10 for the tax rate going into that parameter. Okay, so I'm pressing F11. Now I'm at the return statement. Cost is $10. Tax rate is 0.1. Now, F11, back up to main. Okay, now as soon as I press F11, I hover over the total, I've got my $11 because the function calculated the $1 and it was added to the original cost, which is $10, so there I have my $11. And that's it. Functions that return values. One more thing that I'd like to mention is that students, they kind of, when given instructions and once they're asked to create a function that'll return a value, they start to make things more difficult than they need to be. I'll just say this. What a function accepts as far as parameters really has no bearing on what it gives back. You remember the print char functions in previous videos. They accepted parameters, but they did not return anything. This function happens to accept a couple of arguments. It has two parameters, and it also returns a value. What's coming in has no bearing on what's going back, and vice versa. I may ask you to write a function that returns a value and accepts nothing for whatever. It just depends on the design of the function and what it's supposed to do. So just kind of keep these separately in your mind. If you ever get instructions from me, it'll be very clear that it will have these types of arguments, and that's your cue to set up the parameters, and then it will return this. Okay, or it may return nothing at all, but just tackle these one at a time. First, set up the parameters as per the instructions, and then focus on the return type. Again, that what's coming in, if anything, has no bearing on what's going back, if anything. So always keep those things separate in your mind.